This is part 2 of our exclusive chat with former Eagles guitarist Bernie Leadon. If you haven't seen part 1, the link is in the description. He was part of a lot of country rock bands, Hearts and Flowers, Dillard and Clark, the Flying Burrito Brothers, great guitarist, banjo player, mandolin, steel guitar, dobro, and was in that first quartet incarnation of the Eagles with Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Randy Meisner, and Bernie on guitar. He was with them for their first 4 albums. The Eagles in 72, Desperado the following year, On the Border in 74, and One of These Nights, 1975. Here's our chat with the great Bernie Leadon.
A lot of fans were really happy to see you.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, I really do believe that, everybody has their own magic, is the way my girlfriend puts it. But there was a piece of the combination of people that was the original 4-piece band, and the sound that was created between the 4 of us, vocally and instrumentally. We each had our part of that. And when I left, that changed. I mean, the songs were still played, and some of the parts were played, but they weren't played the way that I played them, and it didn't have exactly the same vibe. So when I came back and if I play with them, it sounds like the vibe of the early days because it was my vibe that was the way I played that stuff, So, and they have Stuart Smith playing my parts when I'm not there, but he also doubled some of my parts even on the History Of tour. But he had to relearn them a little to play them like I play them because I wasn't going to play them like he played them. I went, no, I invented the part. I'll just play it the way I play it, Mm-hmm. And so it was fun to put my piece back with their piece, and the show started out with just Don and Glenn singing acoustic, and then I came in, I guess, sang Trinity. So this morning it was just the 3 of us, so it was just me, Henley, and Frey harmonizing, and it was acoustic and no loud band, and that was very much kind of the sound from the beginning. So we did a few songs that way. Then Schmidt came out, we did Peaceful Easy Feeling, then Walsh came out, we did Witchy Woman, but then we struck the stage and then came out as 10-piece, 5 Eagles and 5 backing musicians with B3, piano, another percussionist, and, the sound, when you add instruments, it starts taking up room in the mix, So It starts, inevitably, new frequencies that are loud cancel out other frequencies. I honestly, myself, preferred the original 4-piece group over the 5-piece group with Felder, not so much to do with any criticism of Felder per se, but just the fact that another player takes up extra room and everybody has to economize or it sounds not good. Henley and I speak or text occasionally and that kind of thing, so we're in touch. My girlfriend knows his wife and et cetera, but no, I wasn't. Directly to answer it, no, I wasn't asked to do it, but I wasn't that particularly interested either. We had just done it with Glenn. I think we did 170 shows over 2 years, and we did a lot of really good shows, and that was with Glenn. And then to do it not with Glenn, and I played with Deacon on the memorial show at the Forum for Glenn, and we did, Deacon and I and Schmidt did Peaceful Easy Feeling without Henley, and it was a lot of fun. That was kind of the first, people saw that show and thought, well, the band could still be viable. But to replace Glenn, they had to get 2 people. They got Deacon, and then they needed somebody to come and sing Glenn's other songs that were really a little past Deacon's reach. And so they got Vince Gill. And Vince is a great guitar player. He's a friend of mine. And actually, my son and his wife, Amy's son, Matt, are partners in the hemp business up here. So, we're all kind of connected. And the way I look at it is they're all out there working for me, selling my catalog. So it's all good. The first one, I'm not sure if it was released. Yeah, maybe around the time I left in that late summer, something like that.
But doesn't that give you satisfaction that those are your years? That's right up to One of These Nights. Those are your years.
Yeah, including One of These Nights, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing, and it's the biggest selling record in America, I guess. Mm-hmm. Although I guess Michael Jackson skips it every once in a while. But I think worldwide maybe, Thriller itself as a single title, I think worldwide has sold more than any other record. Yeah. Maybe still. But the Eagles keep selling. I remember not that many years ago, there was, however many that the RIAA said that, who had sold the most. And Garth Brooks had sold 100 million, partly because they wanted to make sure that they got that, and so they did a bunch of discounts and stuff like that, and they kind of fudged that a little bit, I think. But he had 100 million. The Beatles were at 160 million or something. Garth Brooks had 100 million. The Eagles were like at 85 million or something like that. But I hear that the Eagles were at 150 million.
Song 21 was released when I did the math. You were 25, and to me, that's it's sung like a mid-20s guy who just wants to live out his life.
Well, okay, so this is kind of funny, and this is, there's always somebody usually in the business. I mean, when you're doing a project, there's usually people kind of going, well, I think we should do this, or why don't we do this? The Desperado album came about because somebody, I guess it was Ned Doheny, gave Fry or somebody a book on the Dual and Dalton Outlaw Gang, or gave to Jackson Brown or something. Anyway, so Jackson was involved. So what I remember is Jackson and J.D. Souther, Fry were all kind of playing around with this idea, and they wrote a couple songs. They wrote the Dual and Dalton song. There's a part A and a part B. The reprise, and I'm not sure if the song Desperado existed yet, but they thought, well, we can plug that into it, right? And so they said, let's do a concept album, and Fry wanted to do that. David Geffen hated this idea. He basically said, you're a new band, you just had 3 top 10 singles, and you want to do what? You want to do a cowboy concept album? You're out of your fucking mind. You're going to ruin your career. And we were like, yeah, but Fry said, we want commercial success and artistic pure approval. And, okay, whatever. So we proceeded to do it. I guess Geffen thought, well, there'll probably be some singles on there. But Fry came to me and he went to Meisner and said, I think that these are the characters that, the people that were in the Dual and Dalton gang. The analogy was that they were like an early rock band gang. And, so we're going to write songs about these people. And so he suggested, I don't know if he suggested I write a song called 21, but there was a guy in the band called Bitter Creek Newsom, was one of the members of the Dalton gang. So I took that title to be Bitter Creek. And honestly, I don't remember I think 21 was just kind of from the point of view. I was trying to write a song from the point of view of a devil may care 20-something, early 20-something guy who's just out there kicking ass, which we thought applied to us and rock and roll people and also to those gangs that were, busting down doors. I mean, the gangs were like robbing banks and shooting people, so I'm not condoning that at all, but we were glorifying it. But, I mean, we grew up on cowboy films, right? I mean,
yeah.
So, the whole cowboy ethic or myth was the whole go west, young man, that whole thing. And, a lot of people overseas apparently say about Americans, when they're being kind of erratic or pushy, is like, oh, you're acting like a effing cowboy, like, chill out, man. But it was part of the ethos that we all grew up in, and I imagine somebody from Alberta can identify with that.
Yep.
People tend to think that, I was the country guy and I didn't like, almost like it's opposing political parties. And it's like, so would you come to my picnic and eat my food? It's like, no. I mean, it wasn't a problem. I enjoyed that stuff. If I hadn't enjoyed Glenn Fry's, desire to be a kid from Detroit, which is what he was. I appreciated that stuff. And, he played a Les Paul Jr. with single coil pickups, P90 pickups, and that's one of the main iconic rock and roll guitars. And so he got a great tone. He played, through a Deluxe or a Princeton and, got this great tone. By the way, I'll tell you something funny is all of us, we thought that the controls on a guitar should all be on 10 and all the controls on the amp should all be on 10 because, like, you paid for them to go up to 10. You might as well use everything you paid for or something like that. But it's actually not a great tone, right? And when we went to record in London, we were like, we set up and we go, okay, that's what we sound like. And Glenn Johns, the producer, would come out and he'd go to each one of us and say, okay, play. And he'd stick his head down by the amp and he'd start turning the knobs until it sounded good to him, and because that's what the microphone was going to hear, right? So he did that to each of us and went and turned the dials on the amp, turned the treble down. It's pretty funny. Well, honestly, I don't recall. And you mean in terms of writing it?
Yeah.
I don't really have any idea. It probably was through a couple extra chords in somewhere or something. That was usually it. But I'm glad there are some songs that we're all credited with writing because that shows we really were a band,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially around Desperado, Glenn Johns was still producing it. Glenn Johns, by the way, was very adamant that Meisner and myself should be pushed forward as well and it not just turn into the Glenn and Don show immediately, which is, I think, what they wanted. They were pretty pushy, honestly, but Glenn Johns kind of created the balance that exists on the first two albums. And when after he left and we got Felder, then there was another guy, the whole dynamic changed, and then pretty soon Don and Glenn had written all the hits, and so it did become the Don and Glenn show. The dynamic with me and Felder was I met him in high school. He was a really good guitar player. He could play really good Chet Atkins stuff, finger picking. He knew stuff that I didn't know. He knew he knew electric guitar players that I didn't know, and he knew stuff that I didn't know. And so he was a good guy for me to meet. And so then we were in a top 40 band in Gainesville, Florida, for a year and a half at least, until I had to join the Army Reserve because I was going to get drafted. Me and the lead singer both had to join it, and the thing kind of fell apart. So Felder and I were in a band, and we lived not that far apart from each other. Our parents did. And Tom Petty also lived within 4 blocks of me and Felder. And my little brother Tom was in Mudcrutch, was the same age as Petty. But anyway, so me and Felder knew each other from Florida. Then I got the call to go and join Hearts and Flowers, and I left in late '67 and left Felder there in Florida. Well, he then went to the Berklee School of Music in Boston, not affiliated with Berklee in California. The Berklee School of Music, spelled with 2 E's on the end, not EY, is in Boston, Massachusetts. So it was a very highly regarded music school. And he went there for several years and was in a band up there called Flow. And then the Eagles happened, and we were coming through town, and I called him or he called me. He came down to the show, and maybe more than one time, different couple gigs. But anyway, I remember he was kind of playing and showing off for the other guys in my band, and they were like, oh, yeah, like you're really a rock guitar player, man. And so then he moved to L.A., and I helped him. He came and slept on my floor with his young family. He got a place. I got him a job at Geffen Roberts Management Company, playing with somebody else in their office, David Blue, and then he played with Crosby and Nash. So now he's on the scene. He's in our management office, and I guess he was working on Henley and Fry, I think. And interestingly, I thought Glenn Fry was a really good, focused electric guitar player, rock and roll electric guitar player. Not really fancy, but Glenn had that gift of playing something simple that people could understand, and could remember. He kind of went for the middle of the matter, and Felder had been to this fancy music school, and he knew a lot of fancy licks and stuff. He was a really great guitar player, but it was a different dynamic, And so anyway, the guys came to me and said, we think we want to have Felder in the band. What do you think about that? And honestly, I had already kind of seen the writing on the wall that it was going to become the Don and Glenn show, and I was already kind of thinking maybe I won't be in this for a very long time. So I said, okay. And my attitude was, well, if I'm going to leave, better that a friend of mine gets the gig, But then I stayed for a year and a half, and we did most of it. We already had a couple of cuts. We already had Best of My Love and You Never Cry Like a Lover for the third album, On the Border. But then we changed producers, went to L.A., hired Bill Simzik to be the producer, and had Felder play on that rest of that album. So then he was in the band. Then there was a pretty long break. Then we did One of These Nights. Of course, he played some great solos on that. Well, I don't know if it would have been different, but because I left and Walsh came in. But see, I never really listened to Hotel California, the album, because, I wasn't there anymore. I couldn't avoid hearing the hits. But I'd never heard Pretty Maids in a Row until the History Of tour, and it opened the second half of the show after the intermission. And I was like, wow, there was a great video for that concert, and I was like, wow, that's a great song, Pretty Maids All in a Row. And so, it's a nice little question, but the truth is I moved on. Walsh came in. He did a great job. They made a great album, and then they broke up. Oh, well, it was only 13 years ago, so it wasn't back in the day. I did stop doing cocaine before I left the Eagles, and so I stopped doing any hard drugs and anything except maybe a little bit of pot. And I've reverted back to just beer, which is what I grew up on. And the funny thing is, I thought if you just smoked a little pot and drank a few beers, even a 6-pack, nothing was happening, because I wasn't doing coke and I wasn't doing opium or something else. So I kind of sobered up back in the day when I realized basically I can't live. I literally can't live like this. I won't live. So I backed off, and I used to go to the beach all the time. When I left the band, I got on a health kick. I was running every day. I got way into surfing. Was going surfing almost every day. I was out in the sun and the waves, paddling, running. eating really good food, and having a few beers. So I wasn't really at that point drinking alcoholically. But then later on, I just came to a point where even having a couple beers just wasn't going to work for me anymore. So I came to a point where I just had to completely stop everything. And basically almost all my friends that I still talk to were in recovery, and it became the next right thing to do, to just cut it off entirely. My joke about getting older is I no longer have to drink to have a hangover. I just have one every 3 or 4 days for no apparent reason. So I still have a connection to alcoholism, I guess. So I believed that there was no alcoholism in my family, right? And so then I found out, well, not my parents, not my grandparents on my mom's side, but my mother's grandfather was a very deep bottom alcoholic up in the gold mines of Homestake Gold Mine up in North Dakota in the Black Hills, like in 1890, 1900, 1910. And he ended up running a sober boarding house in Dayton, Ohio, or in Davenport, Iowa. He actually ran a boarding house to help people sober up, which is pretty awesome. And I guess he got sober in the church, And then on my dad's side, my dad had a few beers, but he wasn't an alcoholic. But his father, my grandfather, I always wondered what was up with Grandpa. He had kind of this interesting kind of smile. He was very quiet, sat in his chair all the time. Well, it turned out he kept a bottle of Irish whiskey in the basement. He'd go down and make toddies with some water and some honey. So Grandpa was always down in the basement or coming up with his toddy. And so Grandpa was always tipsy, and he had some issues surrounding that, I think. So I think Grandpa on one side and great-grandpa on the other were, in fact, alcoholics. And most families find something like this to be true when they dig deep enough. But I didn't know it because it was well hidden. You know what I mean? Well, she essentially wrote the song, and I wrote the second verse, is the way I remember it, and then I came up with the arrangement to record it. But I wasn't writing too many songs at the time, and I wanted that song recorded. Henley and Fry didn't want that song on the album, and this is one of those stupid stories, but I basically let it be known if they didn't record that song, I was going to break his arm or something like that. So, I mean, and that, that's very much, anyway, there's some other stories that are similar to that kind of thing, but it's absurd, right? The song is I Wish You Peace, but I'm going to break your fucking arm if you don't record it. Just it shows you the insanity of life sometimes. And so then that song was quite different than the rest of the songs on the album. So then the album came out, and there was a review in Playboy magazine, and the Playboy magazine review panned all the rest of the album, but really thought I Wish You Peace was fantastic. And then like Robert Hilburn or somebody who wrote for the LA Times, reviewed the album and loved the whole album except for I Wish You Peace. And then some years later, then I'm getting notices from people, hey, we're using I Wish You Peace for our wedding, or we used it in our wedding, and it was so fantastic. And like anything, it affects some people. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people loved it, use it in their wedding. So I mean, you just never know, man. They say you didn't vote for Trump, did you? I don't know. There's not one thing. I mean, people will go. We were on the tours 2014. We're in Europe. We're in Amsterdam. And Australian 60 Minutes has come to do a thing on the band. So the crew's around for the whole day, right? And then we set up in a ballroom or something at the hotel, and they set up their, little stage and little lights and everything, and we do this interview. And so several questions. There was a lady interviewer, and then so she gets to me and she goes, so you've rejoined the band after leaving in 1975. Do you ever regret leaving the band? And I thought quick and said, well, my son asked me that one time. And I said, well, listen, son, if I hadn't left the band when I did, I probably wouldn't have met your mother, and you wouldn't be here. So how do you feel about it now? The room broke up, and my son, my son said, good answer, Dad, So I have no regrets about any of it. It all worked out good, and they still send me some mailbox money, and that's nice, and I'm still writing and playing, and you never know, there might be a Bernie album in the future.
It took you, to 27 years between that one and the other one?
So now it's only been 14 years, I think, since the last one.
So before we part company, are you working on some tunes?
Oh, I'm writing all the time. I mean, but all the time for me, well, I probably wrote 8 songs in the last year or so, which is for me is a lot,
Mm-hmm.
But I tend to throw ones out that I don't like, so 8
okay.
8 that I'll admit to.